Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. We are in our second home right now, the Royal Festival Hall, so you forgive any background noise, but I'm sitting here with my lovely friends Ryan. Hello Ryan.
Bonjour, hello.
And Dylan.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
We're very warm.
It's good to be back on the podcast.
Ooh.
Last time all three of us were together was when we were talking about the musical that we worked
Oh my
on
God, it
together.
was.
Yes.
I forgot about that.
With many other wonderful people as well. We've been to see some shows, which is always a nice thing to do when you're talking about musical theatre on a musical theatre podcast. Ryan, let's start with you, because you've come down from the north, I shall call it, to kind of have a gamut of shows, haven't you?
Yes, I should have been in Europe this week. So instead of me being in Europe, I thought, well, I'm not going to remove my time off from work. I'm going to come down south and see shows. So that's exactly what I did.
And what have you seen?
I have seen, I saw a matinee of Amelie. I saw Heathers in the evening. Last night I saw Cinderella with you two.
You did.
And tonight we are seeing Be More Chill.
Yes.
I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I know nothing about Be More Chill, so it'd be lovely
I first
to...
found that musical in 2017, and I've wanted to see it ever since. And I was gutted I never got a chance to see it before that thing happened.
We are doing an episode all about Be More Chill with Michael and Antonia in the future, so we'll talk about when we get round to it. But let's concentrate on the three shows that you and collectively I and have seen. Amelie. Now, we talked about Amelie ages ago on the podcast when it started its UK tour. I saw it in Wimbledon, a very big theatre for a very small show, and it didn't work.
Okay.
You saw it at the Criterion, didn't you?
Yes.
With a pillar in front of you, possibly. That's what that theatre's famous for.
I had fabulous seats, actually.
Yeah.
I was about 5 or 6 rows from the front, directly in the centre. So I had the best seats I think I could possibly have. And also that theatre has amazing legroom, and with the nature of social distancing, I had no one next to me. So it was the perfect experience, to be
And
perfectly
immersive
honest.
sound effects of the tube.
Well, yes, but we were talking about that earlier, and I always forget with London, like certain shows, if there's prolonged periods of silence, you're going to hear a tube go by. But because Amelie is set at a train station, effectively, or the set is anyway,
Stylised.
it kind of worked.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you didn't realise that was the tube, you probably wouldn't have noticed it, because stranger things have been in the background in shows than the sound of a train going by. So,
Dylan, do you know anything about Amelie?
I don't. I know that there's a film.
Yeah.
I know it's
Not to be confused with Chocolat, which is what people tend to get
I know
confused
it's
with.
like
really?
Yeah.
I did not know
It's
that.
very French.
Yes.
I know that much. I don't really know much about it. I was looking at Ryan sort of said about it last night, and went away and had to look at tickets and stuff, and thinking maybe pop in to see it. But I don't really know much about it.
It's very... Well, it's an actor-musician piece, first
Yes.
of all. And it's changed... If you listen to the Broadway cast recording, it's quite brash and it's quite American, and you wouldn't think it was French at all. But you listen to the new... And there is a UK cast recording, which is lovely. You listen to that recording, and it's so calm,
Yes.
isn't it? And it's so... You know, it's amazing. I don't want to poo-poo on the Americans, but it's more subtle than the American performance.
It makes, to me, I haven't really listened to the American cast recording properly yet, so realistically I couldn't tell you what it sounds like too much, but the style in which the music was written, and in terms of, it felt very cohesive to the show that I was watching.
What's the visual bit that stuck with you?
Oh my Christ. So this is a bit of a spoiler if you don't want to know about this, but sometimes...
Was it a light bulb moment?
It was a light bulb moment.
Quite literally.
Yeah. Sometimes the simplest of things are often the most magical in theatre. So, a little bit of context. In the show, the second level of the set is Amelie's home, and there is a moment in the show where you find that out, and she has to get there, but there's no stairs or anything, and I was like, oh, okay. A light bulb comes down. I think they start singing about a lampshade for some reason, and she puts her hand in, and it looks like she's screwing a light bulb out. And then, unbeknownst to me, she's actually grabbing onto a wrist strap, and it lifts her up, and she goes straight into the apartment on the second level, but it was so slick and so unexpected.
Graceful as well.
Yeah, very beautiful. I audibly gasped. I was like, oh, wow.
I mean, it's nothing compared to what we saw last night.
No.
But it's little things like that which only theatre can provide, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Those kind of theatrical things. Something as simple as... I mean, maybe that's in the film. I don't know if it's that kind of...
I'm not unsure myself either, but it was so elegant. And it was so, again, it wasn't something that was done for the sake of doing it. It was absolutely something that, again, made sense to what I was watching.
And it also adds to the fantastical element of the piece.
Yeah, it was fabulous.
I don't remember much about the story. Can you remind us of the story?
So, Amelie... The real short version of it, because it is something you probably need to discover for yourself, is about a woman, Amelie. She's kind of a strange woman. She figures out that she can make people's lives better at one point, and then there's also a bit of a love story in there. That's the super condensed version. Any lovers of the film are probably going to shoot me for my breakdown of that. But there is
the socio-cultural commentary of the piece, right?
Absolutely. But it was my first show back since after all of this has happened. It's the first time I've been in a theatre. The last time I was in a theatre was actually Be More Chill at the Other Palace. And I didn't know it was an actor muso show. And when the show opened and they went into the opening number, it was very, like, it sounds how it's going to sound. It was very emotional to be in a theatre and be like, I'm watching something in front of me for the first time in nearly 2 years at this point. It was very beautiful as a piece.
Are you glad that was your first show to kind of ease you in gently?
To be perfectly honest, I wouldn't have minded what my first show was back, but in terms of... if I had a choice, my first show back to the theatre would be Wicked, which I am going to for its reopening night, but that's just because it's my favourite. In terms of the themes of Amelie and the tones it has throughout it, it was kind of weirdly fitting, and it had a very positive outlook. The musical as a whole, even though it talks about dark topics, is very uplifting.
I wonder if that's why they brought it back.
Possibly. There is a character in it that has like the cold all the time, and I was like, well, but it was very good.
Has Ryan sold it to you, Dylan?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I might go and see it at some point because there's some quite cheap tickets there at the moment. So
I do have to mention, casting wise, it's fantastic. The performances really are a masterclass in what it is to be a stage performer. And they play
instruments as well.
And they play instruments. It props to absolutely every single person in the cast, but Audrey Brisson, who plays Amelie.
She's amazing, isn't she? I think I saw her on the tour.
Incredible. Oh, absolute.
But she looks that kind of French part, doesn't she?
She's just... I want to see her do more stuff because... Oh, wow. Yeah.
Good. And then you went to see what?
I went to see Heathers that evening. I sat in Oldenstein for 2 hours, got very confused as to what I wanted to order, and had a very lovely chat with the barista because my brain sort of left the building after coming out of Amelie. But I went to see Heathers, which is probably the most contrast I could have had, which I quite like doing on a 2-show day. Now, I have never seen a production of Heathers in person. I'm not promoting bootlegs, but I have definitely inhaled a bootleg or two of Heathers, and I am very versed in terms of the cast recordings that have been released. So I know the show quite well from an outsider's perspective.
I've seen it 3 times, I think. I saw it once, no, possibly twice. It's so long ago.
Yeah.
I saw it at the Palace and then again at the Haymarket, I think. And it's wonderful, isn't it? When you go into a show and you go, I know I'm going to enjoy this regardless of the quality, regardless of how it sounds, regardless if something happens, if this happens, if that happens. When you go into a show already knowing that there is so much slack that show has, that you'll still come out loving it regardless, and you actually sit in the theatre and go, this is actually a really good show. Do you know the film?
I know the film very well. I'm a big fan of the film. And we were Dylan and I mentioned this actually yesterday before we saw Cinderella. What's so nice about the movie and the musical is they both exist in different planes of each other. So you can absolutely enjoy them both.
We were saying it was the same as like Dogfight, where for the musical adaptation of Dogfight, they changed quite a lot from the film, where they like added in a third character, they took out some characters, and they made it more theatre friendly.
It's like Matilda as well. They did the whole kind of backstory with her parents. Being
And I do find that that's what's really great about when a musical adaptation from a film takes place. That's how I always think it should be. I don't think it should be a carbon copy of the film.
Yes.
Much like, dare I say it, much like School of Rock, where it was pretty much a carbon copy of the film with existing script from the film in the show. The difference was they added in stuff about the parents, but stuff like I do think that's
because you used to work at School of Rock.
Yeah. So I used to do a bit of crew work on the stage at School of Rock. The only sort of difference, realistically, if you actually watch the musical and you watch the film straight after, or either way, you will see that the script is exactly the same as the show. That they're both exactly the same. Julian Fellows literally took bits from the film script into the theatre show.
What do you think? I mean, we're on a tangent here, but it doesn't matter. What do you think of things like the producers, where they'll just put the stage show on film? Because the criticism with that film was it didn't work because it's so broad, something like The Producers.
I find it's one of those very rare situations in the world where it can work translating from the musical. Very rarely do I think it can work in reverse of going from a movie that isn't necessarily a musical, making it into a stage musical. I find it's very hard to make an already existing stage musical into a movie, because there have been some successes. Chicago is the first one that pops into my mind, but more often than not, I personally struggle with the translation of going from a theatrical production to a movie
Which
production.
is the same with Rent. When they translated Rent from theatre to film, it didn't work.
Yes.
So therefore, how worried would you be going in to see Wicked on film?
I'm terrified. That's a genuine, but at the same time, I say I'm terrified. Regardless, I am one person. My opinion does not matter.
I do think, after having seen In the Heights, which John M. Chu has directed, I feel a lot more confident that he's going to do brilliant things with the Wicked film. As
Prom
director
as well.
of the Wicked film.
I didn't watch The Prom because James Corden exists.
The Prom was the Prom. The less said about the Prom, the better. That was.
See, I don't know. I think
that was an awful adaptation, in my opinion.
In terms of the story and the show and what I've read and what I've listened to, it's charming. It's a good night, and I do think it's a story that exists for a purpose, and it has its own space in sort of in the community. But I
do think there are some
James Corden.
fantastic theatre to film adaptations. Another one that used to Chicago, another one that would spring to my mind would be Mamma Mia. I thought Mamma Mia was a spectacular translation of, because it existed.
All three of them, and there's only one Mamma Mia stage show, so that's
it
impressive.
existed in its own world.
I'm waiting for the day when Cher comes in to play.
Everyone.
Everyone? Yeah.
Just everyone. She just does every part.
So I'm actually going to retract my previous statement then, because you've kind of summed up what I was trying to say and couldn't articulate. I think if it is being translated one way or the other, I think taking the route of keeping it in different universes but using the same premise is the best way to go about it. Unless it's the direct filmed version of the stage show.
It does make me worried about this recording of Mean Girls, the musical, because
Excuse me, this is news to me.
Did you not know?
Nope.
Tina Fey has signed a deal to film a musical film version of
with Netflix, isn't it?
of Mean Girls.
And the casting for that goes out when?
But back to Heathers.
Sure.
So you're a big fan of the film.
Yes.
Were you disappointed? So it did what the theatrical stuff is meant to do, which it adds more to it, or is it just kept the same story and emotional hit points? It just had its songs.
It's very different, in and of itself, purely because I find how do I phrase this? The musical gives me more teenage angst more so than the film does. The film is just generally quite dark.
Yeah.
Very funny, but very dark. Whereas I find this musical with the nature of how it is, I do find Heathers quite an like the whole end of Act 1. If that doesn't get you like, oh okay, I don't know what will. But I do find, because it's a musical and because maybe the nature of the audience it attracts, it does have a bit more of a little bit of more of an upbeat vibe. But that's not me saying that in a negative way by any means. That's just the case of, I think the original movie was a rated R, and this musical does have to commercially
You're
appeal.
up north now.
Up north.
And can we just like take a moment to appreciate that Andy Finkman has directed every single stage version,
Amazing.
from the original one with what's her face,
Barrett,
all the way to this current production. So he has been with it from the incarnation of the stage show and has changed bits every time he's directed it.
What I will say is, I noticed when I saw this production, not last night, it was the night before, upon recording of this podcast, they've tweaked some more bits of the book, and there's some lyrics that are different. And it's what I'm really loving about Heathers at the moment is, I haven't seen the previous 2 iterations with Carrie, whether it was in the Royal Haymarket or in the other palace, or even I didn't see the original off-Broadway. I've seen bootlegs of them. I have not seen them in person. But to me, it's one of these shows that every single time this comes around, the tweaks that they are doing to it are working.
It feels like it's constantly evolving.
Yeah, and it's getting stronger and stronger, and
As I said, I've seen it twice, both with Carrie, and we'll talk about Carrie in a bit, but
Yes.
not the musical, the
Although it is a fantastic musical.
Yes.
it is. We need Carrie to play Carrie, that would be...
it'd be fabulous.
I think she would be great.
Yeah.
She'd be good for that.
But the thing that I loved it, and I'm a massive fan of Lawrence O'Keefe's music, even though you can tell, yes, that song is from Legally Blonde, but it's the same...
I feel like
chip on my shoulder is the same feel as Brain Freeze, but anyway, that's
Brain freeze.
Freeze my brain.
whatever you
Freeze
want to
your
call
brain.
Freeze your brain.
There we go, we got the
Even
third
I got
time's a
the
charm.
even I got it wrong.
The bit that kind of irked me, and I don't know the film, does the film have "Oh, we're all friends again" at the end? Because it seemed that's such an American, happy, cheesy thing to do.
Well, I mean, an example as to why that would be is, I'm a big horror fan, massive tangent in terms of horror films. I'm going to completely spoil a random horror film now on a musical theatre podcast as an example as to the difference between the British and American culture. The Descent, that came out in 2005, directed by Neil Marshall, is a British horror film that is incredible, masterclass in horror. The ending of that movie, the final sequence, and I'm literally going to spoil the ending now, but the one person left gets out, runs to the car, drives off, a ghost of their friend appears, and then the person wakes up and they actually haven't got out, and the camera fades to black and they are still trapped in the cave system that they're in and they don't get out. The American ending ends after the ghost of the friend appears in the car and it blacks out to say that person got out alive. I feel like and when that went over to the States, they literally said at the time it was too dark for audiences, so they tweaked the ending.
To put it in terms of musical theatre, look at Little Shop of Horrors.
Yes.
Look at what's the other one that comes to my mind? The Witches, for
Yes.
example, the film, the good film with that, not the new one. But so what the film of Heathers has
The film, I think it has like, in comparison, it has like a nod to that, but I feel like the problem is with it is they would have had just a nod to it in this stage version, but because it's a musical, it has a final number, and I think the fact that there's a final number there is what does it, but also it works because that final number ties up so many things that you've been waiting for. And in terms of what you've got to remember in stuff like musicals like this as well, is it's not playing to necessarily our generation, it's playing to a generation that's younger, that are these ages of the characters in the show that need a happy ending. They need that to tie up because they need to be made to feel
kids today.
Validated
and safe, and like it has to relate to the audience it's going for. And I also think there is a degree of personal taste. I don't mind that it's a happy ending.
No.
And to be perfectly honest, it's a cracking final number.
I think it works.
It just made me
for
think
that
if
sort of
the,
show.
if Brits had written it, it would have, like if it was at the National or something, it would have been a lot more kind of bleak at the end. It's a bleak story, isn't
Yes,
it?
but I do think with something like Heathers, with it being a musical as well, it needs to have some sort of resolve, because you've just gone through that whole conflict of the character killing off half of the bloody school. So you need to have some sort of resolve where it ends up being, oh, now he's got his comeuppance, everyone else can live happily ever after.
But there is the black comedy element of her coming back from the dead and narrating the whole thing.
I mean, that is brilliant. I love that moment where like she fakes her death and just... Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen it.
Tell us about Jodie Steele, Ryan.
Jodie Steele.
I mean, she's fantastic anyway.
Oh, well, I mean, I've seen
She's
some
done that role
performances.
since Palace, isn't she?
Yes, I've seen performances. It's very easy to be a bitch on stage, right? It's very easy to not
So
be.
it's Ryan.
Thank you. To play a nasty person, it just is. But she finds peaks and like highs and valleys and colours and like I'm being very geeky right now. She is so icy cold on that stage.
She makes it
best
look
way.
damn easy, doesn't she? Like it's just flawless.
Her line deliveries, and what I love is something that I picked up throughout as everybody's singing, obviously singing numbers like Big Fun is one of the... Is it called Big Fun?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Candy Store as well.
Well, not in Candy Store, but I noticed it's in Big Fun. She hardly moves her lips to sing because why would Heather Chandler do anything more than that?
Exactly.
And it's
those little character
Ah.
details. Although just going on a slight tangent from still on Heather's, but I wish that these teenage drama shows would stop doing a musical episode. Yes, I'm looking at you,
Riverdale.
Glee, didn't they do Heathers as well?
No, I'm talking more about Riverdale.
No. As in, like, Dylan's referring to, like, can you remember how Buffy had that one musical episode? Scrubs had that one musical episode. But
How I
nowadays...
Met Your Mother had that musical episode.
Yes.
But then that worked. But then, like, you've got these teen dramas like Riverdale that are taking on...
Because they did do Heathers, didn't they?
They did Heathers, they did Carrie,
They did
and they've
Hedwig
done
and Agri
Hedwig,
Inch.
which all of them were awful. They were horrendous. I love Riverdale. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a brilliant show, but I hate when these teen dramas do things like that because you're changing the context of a lot of it.
If you do it, do an original musical.
Yeah,
Like
Which is what
Buffy
Scrubs did,
and
didn't
Scrubs
unless
did,
you're
and-
Glee, then you can get away with it.
Yeah, of course.
Glee can no longer get away with anything because Glee was that show that managed to talk about every serious issue, but also not talk about those serious issues well at all.
But then, but then I think that like Glee has. Sorry, again we're going on a slight tangent, but Glee has paved the way for things like High School Musical, the series,
The Ride, the Fast Track, the stage show.
Exactly, all of that.
Yeah.
Because like I was talking to somebody at work about this because they were like, "Oh, you need to watch it. It's really good." And they were talking about the second season where there's this competition and you could win an award for the best High School Musical. But they were like High School Musical 2. They were originally going to put on High School Musical 2, but they were like, no, High School Musical 2 isn't right for us. It's not good enough for us to put on, so we'll do Beauty and the Beast instead, which is very strange. Considering
about High School Musical 2 is the best High School Musical out of the three of them.
I'd like to do an episode focusing on, because I was recently introduced to the wonderful Teen Beach movie
Oh yeah.
film.
great film.
Yeah, and they're, all these Disney things, they're good, but that's for another day entirely.
Swinging this back round to Heather's
Yes.
because Christina, I think it's Bennington.
Bennington, yes.
Oh my
Of
Christ.
Bat Out of Hell fame, along with the male lead as well.
Of me following every aspect of her belting career from now on in existence. I love high notes, belt in my face.
You fall in love with her
immediately in Heather's. So the obvious thing, like the elephant in the room, everybody talking about the new cast of Heathers. I think one of the major things is people are going to be comparing Carrie and Christina. They're incomparable because they're not comparable. How do I phrase that? What's the correct way to phrase that? You can't compare them because...
And you shouldn't compare them.
You shouldn't compare them,
This
but
is exactly the same with when Carrie took it originally in London and everyone was comparing her to Barrett.
But you can't compare... So, interestingly...
It's like Sheridan Smith versus Thingy, who did Legally Blonde on Broadway.
But you can't compare the three actresses who've done... Even Olivia Moore as well, who was the understudy. I'm not 100% sure who the understudy is in this show. I have the programme at home. I need to find that out.
She's a very good friend of mine.
But... all right, do you want to pick the name up we just dropped on the floor there?
Watch your head, Ryan.
All of the women who've played the role of Veronica have taken it and made it their own completely, and that's what I loved watching Christina do.
That's the making of a phenomenal actor.
I loved her take on Veronica, and obviously not everything is about the high notes by any means.
Oh, really, Ryan?
But I say it every single time I'm on this podcast. I love a high note, and my Christ, can she sing? The belt is so pure. The belt is so good. Skrelt in my face every day. She needs to be Elphaba. Whether she wants to be or not is a different story. Please be Elphaba. But tangent from that is the whole new cast. Incredible. They're really, really well.
The song I remember going down really well was the one the girl that was about to kill herself sings.
Kindergarten Boyfriend?
Yes. That was amazing. And that really brought the house down, that song.
Just every single number. But the beautiful thing about Heathers, though, is it attracts an audience that is so responsive and so exciting. And I went into that theatre and there was such a buzz before the show.
I think it's got a cult following, that show. I think you're always going to get those people that will come in with their scrunchies and that would be like, oh my god, it's Heathers.
But it's, to my knowledge, apart from obvious things, it's never been off.
How do you mean?
Well, it's always at the Palace, or it's always at the Haymarket. Now it's back at the Haymarket. It's going on a tour.
But it's interesting because Heathers, you talking about how, well, does it, if it was written by Brits, would it do this and should it do this? Well, the commentary here is it's been more successful in the UK than it has been in the States.
Right, yeah.
So
I think as well, part of that is because of the incredible producing of Paul Taylor Mills. He knows what shows are going to be a hit, and he knows exactly how to do them.
Yes.
And he knows exactly who the target audience is going to be for those specific shows. You look at every show he's produced, even things like when he produced High Fidelity at the Turbine. Yes, he knows exactly who's going to cope to that show, exactly how popular it's going to be. And
it lasts longer than a day, which is, I think, the length it lasted on Broadway.
What, High Fidelity? Yeah. It lasted the whole run.
Oh, good.
It was sold out every single
night.
But then I think that what also helped with High Fidelity when it came over here was it had the phenomenal Vicky Stone. If you haven't heard of her, she taught me singing, so you need to look her up. She is incredible. She's a phenomenal musical comedian. She rewrote it. They literally reformulated the show to take it back to London, because on Broadway they set it in America, which was weird when the film was set in the UK. But they
Full Monty, when that comes here, it's still set in.
They brought it back to the UK and they set it back in its home state, its home country, and made it more British, which is exactly what it needed. And I think that's why it was sold out every single night, because they rejigged it, even with Tom Kitt and all the writers. They reworked it so that it was a British musical.
Speaking of writers, Ryan, could you tell it was written by the same chap that did Legally Blonde?
As in Heathers?
Yes, musically.
Yes and no.
He kind of has that stigma now that he's the kind of I'm the teenage girl musical.
Teen angst musical.
Yeah.
I mean...
Because he's done two of the best ones, which is Heathers and Legally Blonde.
I'm just watching the thing spike as the chair goes dropped on the floor. I mean, in terms of styles, yes. And I think when it comes to composers, it's very hard to find a composer that doesn't have the same traits in every show, because that's their stamp and that's how they write things.
As we'll talk about shortly.
Really?
This is what happens when you've got children.
It's fine. I mean, it's our fault for recording in a public space. Again, another thing about Heathers I loved is the sound. Something that we were talking about yesterday is my problem at the moment in theatres, for my personal taste, is often the sound is too quiet.
And I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Especially there's one...
My favourite show in existence,
Wicked, is very quiet.
Is quiet when you go to see it at the Apollo.
I was saying to you yesterday, or the other day, when I'm in a theatre, I want to be immersed into the world that the players are in. Mm-hmm. I don't want to remember that outside of those doors is... I don't want to remember that I'm in a theatre outside those doors is London. I want to be fully immersed into that.
That's our theme park background coming in, isn't it?
Well, it's sort of, yeah. I mean, it's just... I've always been like that.
Or you could say it's the...
Because theatre, like with theme parks, as we've sort of expressed previously on a previous episode, theatre is a form of escapism.
Yeah.
And I want to escape into that world. I don't want to feel like I'm watching something. I want to exist in that world that the players are creating. So having a sound volume, like the sound echoing correctly and being booming and loud, like it used to be 15 years ago.
Not all shows can be ghost stories.
Always
sadly.
helps. I just find it always helps with making you feel like a part of the action rather than an outsider looking in. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, I know what you mean.
So the sound
The sound was great at Heather's. The lighting is very good at Heather's. I just generally I thoroughly enjoyed it. I enjoyed it even more than I thought I was going to, and I just. Yeah, I don't really know what else I can say in regards to it. I just if you can see it, see it.
Interesting on sound. I was looking this up recently, like after we spoke about it. Some theatres now, strangely enough, in London, have sound prohibitors, so you can't go over a certain amount of decibels, which I think is strange in a West End house. Why would you have a sound prohibitor? I find that really odd, but that seems to be the current case. It must be some
health and safety gubbins or something like that.
Probably, which is weird because the moment in Heather's when the school blows up, spoiler, was so incredibly loud. Like, it was comparable to the very first sound that happens in ghost stories. It's so loud and it shook the theatre. So I wonder what that's an interesting thing that you brought up because I didn't know that. It'd be really interesting to know what the guidelines are on that. Does it go by location or does it go by how long, size of the theatre?
I know there was to go back to sort of like Dogfight, when I saw Dogfight in 2014
is this at Southwark?
At the Southwark Playhouse,
I saw that too.
It was incredibly loud. There's that moment in the second act where, spoiler, all of the Marines get killed besides one, and you've got the helicopter, and it literally was deafening. You could not hear yourself think.
It might also be the length that the sounds go on.
That's what I was going to say. Is it the duration?
Because We Will Rock You, for example, still I think had the best sound I've ever heard in any show, as it should, because there's about 9 million speakers in that theatre, even in the floor and stuff, and
just put Dolby Atmos everywhere.
Well, that was continuous loud.
Yes.
So it maybe wasn't as bad, but
also, how many years ago did We Will Rock You close? Because health and safety is in the most recent
We Will Rock You
years.
closed around 2011, didn't it?
2011, 2012.
It's
something
crazy.
Like that.
It's been that long.
It's 10 years. That's what I was going to say. It's been about 10 years
but
since
it's
that
back
show
now,
closed.
which is good.
Yeah.
But
So,
I mean, it's interesting. To segue into our next topic, the first show to have surround sound, which was kind of mentioned by Dylan there, was Phantom of the Opera, and it had the Phantom's voice would fly around the theatre. That was.
I still think that is just fantastic. It's a brilliant. Yeah. We haven't seen the newer production.
Rest in pieces.
We haven't seen this new incarnation that Lawrence, who also directed Cinderella, has put on.
I'm really interested to see it.
I am.
It's interesting how all of the longest running shows, like Les Mis, has now gone to even though they're saying it's the new production that Nick keeps saying it's been around since the dawn of time, the one with the screens. Les Mis is changing, Phantom's changing.
Yeah.
It's
Miss Saigon changed.
Miss Saigon changed.
I think this is because there's one person behind all of those shows.
Yeah.
But the thing is with Miss Saigon, the reason I didn't include that in that is because it hadn't been continuously playing.
Yeah.
It's interesting because
But is Les Mis still the longest running musical in the world? Because
theoretically it's not, because it had its big gap.
I feel like
to be renovated.
I feel like saying something like that, given the fact that there was just a global pandemic, we still are in a global pandemic, is a little bit petty. No, I feel like it should still hold its title.
I get what Nick is sort of alluding to here, because it did close before the pandemic to be renovated. So I do get what Nick is alluding to. It closed, it shut down for like 6 months or something.
Moved to the theatre next door.
And then it had. And then they stopped producing it and did the concert version to renovate the Sondheim. So, yeah, I mean,
I feel like
it's a tricky one. It's like it's very grey with.
If the reason it stopped was for a theatre renovation, which to me it sounds like that the reason to update the production was because it fit into a perfect time when they needed to renovate the theatre anyway. I feel like because it's a technicality that if you do want that to continue running in a theatre that hasn't had any updates,
it has to be done.
Maintenance.
Same with Phantom. Obviously everyone's going crazy that it's not the original production, but when you look at that theatre, that show has been non-stop since it opened.
Yeah.
That theatre was running with the hand winches
Yeah.
from the 80s when it opened. You
Yeah.
had to have people physically under the deck of the stage using the winches and bringing up those candelabras and all of the rest of it and moving everything. Whereas obviously
Yeah.
now everything's gone to automation, which is what they wanted to do. So I think, like you say, I think it needs to be that if it needs its update, then it has to have its update and it has to.
If it
fix
closed
itself.
because it couldn't sell, I think I'd have a different opinion. But because by the sounds of it, it closed because there needed to be some very important renovation work done to the building it was in. And then obviously the pandemic happened, which nobody really had any control over. If they still keep saying it's the longest running show in the world, in the universe, on Mars, on the moon, to ever be produced, sang, belted, I don't care. To me, it still is.
I still think it is.
And if they're still managing to sell it and it's a concert version next door, I mean, that pretty much guarantees that even if that show had stayed open throughout the past year and a half, it would still be selling.
Yeah, I mean,
And I will say that the concert version is very good. And the only thing I don't like about the new version is there's no Revolve. But
I didn't mind the new version, even though I did see it 9 years ago, so it's not exactly new anymore. But does it make Lawrence Connor the most prolific director in the West End now?
I would say so, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's
because
a good
you
point.
look at, like, it used to be people like
Trevor Nunn or Matthew Waters?
and like even more recently Stephen Daldry. But you look at the amount, especially currently, the amount of musicals Lawrence Connor's got on the West End. He's got Cinderella, Les Mis, Phantom will be reopening, and then
But he always struck me as a director that's just kind of made shows cheaper to run.
But he's also just popped out of nowhere.
Yeah.
When you think about him, no one knew who he was until he did the 25th anniversary of Les Mis. Like, that was when he sort of became prolific.
I argue that statement with another statement. Making shows cheaper to run, or making shows how he wants them to look, but they just happen to be cheaper to run because the technology is so readily available nowadays.
But he took Miss Saigon, which in my mind in the 80s had massive amounts of automation, and then he made everything be pushed on by people.
But
to me, that should be the other way round.
I do
feel
think
like-
that it, like with something like that, it depends on your directing style. He has a very specific directing style, which you see throughout everything that he's directed, which is why I quite like watching his stuff, because as a director myself, it's quite interesting to see how someone else does stuff. And I think that his style of directing is so far removed from a lot of others, like Trevor Nunn and Stephen Daldry and all the others, that he can get away with it. And I think as well, like Ryan's saying, if you can direct something and put something on for cheaper, like to make it cheaper to run, it's going to last a lot longer, because then you're not spending ridiculous amounts of money trying to keep it running when you can actually have it run.
I feel
better.
like these are conversations and discussions that we're not privy to that have already happened. So when the show was in development, the conversation would have been had using Miss Saigon as an example. Does it or does it not impact the vision and impact what I want this to look like, whether this set piece is automated or whether somebody's pushing it on? No, it doesn't. Amazing. We'll have someone bring it on because it saves money.
It's like when we were discussing Theme Park Fan the Musical, in an ideal world, if we were ever to put it on. And you were asking me questions, and I was asking you questions about, I would like to see it like this.
Yes.
It's that same sort of conversation, I think, that I would see it like everyone wants the same vision, everyone wants the same outcome, but then how do you get to that outcome whilst being on a budget and making, not necessarily on a budget, but whilst making it run smoothly and with a good amount of money that's not going to break your bank.
We when we see things on stage, we are effectively, if we go after previews and after opening night, the show's been frozen. We are seeing it in its in its final iteration. We have not seen the tweaks and the changes and the additions and the subtractions to the show. We've not seen one of the most famous ones, again, go back to Wicked in my brain, is when the first national tour opened for No Good Deed. They were originally going to fly Elphaba on her broom. They tried that in rehearsals, and Stephanie J. Block couldn't open the tour. She had to have 2 months off because she
Twisted her ankle.
It wasn't twist her ankle. She got thrown around into the side of the stage because the thing went wrong. So we don't see all those trials and tribulations, and
that would be cool though, wouldn't it?
I mean,
I think it is interesting what you were saying about that, because even when you do have a Frozen show, so I know, for example, having worked at School of Rock, they still were making changes like 7 or 8 months into the run. They were still there.
Well, sometimes there's a musical's never written; it's only rewritten.
Yeah,
Yes.
Like Lawrence was in the auditorium a lot of the time when I was working at School of Rock, and he was making changes, and he was taking notes, going, "I don't like that. We need to change that. Can you change that back to this?" And blah 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 blah. And that's really interesting that even when a show is frozen and is officially open, they are still making changes to make it work.
Just because, from my understanding of things like that, I know when shows change. So again, Wicked, it originally opened with a giant witch's hat, and then the London production opened, and they got rid of the witch's hat and put a projection of Elphaba in the background, and then that effect became canon for the rest of every other production. So the Broadway production was then changed. Same thing, more contemporary version. Mean Girls tour went out. The whole end of Act 1 changed, and they changed it on Broadway.
I think a director will always say, I know with Wicked, for example, they looked at it and said, right, we now have a chance to look at what we didn't like in the show and fix it, like there's an Elphaba line which they added for the London show. Maybe she saw green and thought it meant go, which was added for London, and then that went into all the other shows. Yes. So I think they look at every major...
Yeah, and it's the same with like Heathers. Andy Finkman had gone, we know that this works, we know that works, let's add this, let's try that and see what that works. And then it's been in every production subsequent to doing that.
My question, just to come around to why I use those as an example, were those changes and tweaks being made, had the Broadway production opened at this point?
Yeah, so the Broadway, so School of Rock had come over about a year and a half, 2 years after the Broadway production had opened.
I thought it opened over here first.
No, it opened on Broadway first.
That is my poor knowledge, I apologise.
It opened on Broadway first.
I think it's porn knowledge.
Yes, absolutely.
School of something else.
And then, so Lawrence had done it over there and then came over here, and he knew what was working over there, but then obviously he wanted to make it British, and British people and Americans aren't the same. We don't have the same humour, we don't get the same things.
Nope.
So, which is why I find very strange that you had, it was a very American musical, but you had a British book writer doing it.
The most British book writer of all time.
Exactly.
Lord Julian Fellows.
Exactly. And then when they brought it over here, they still were making amendments to it and changes. And what I loved about, in my opinion, working at School of Rock was seeing that those changes happen. Even when like the kids cast changed, they were still adapting the kids cast, and you had the resident directors of the kids cast and the adults cast still making changes with Lawrence, because they were each new, especially with the kids, each new set of kids brought something different. Like, just talking on School of Rock again, with there's a character called Freddie, and traditionally in the film Freddie was a male. In one of the kids casts in the West End, there was a female that played Freddie. Freddie's the drummer, if you remember School of Rock or have seen the show. So that obviously brought its own difficulties in, because the part was written for a young male. So they had to adapt that and say things like, oh, her nickname is Freddie, her real name's Frederica, and they had to bring in all of these different backstories and things, and they were making changes to accommodate everything.
That's really interesting, though, in terms of, this is a massive tangent before we actually get on to
the main bulk of
It's a very long segue to get to the new London Theatre.
It's interesting what you're saying is, I feel like nowadays, in terms of like you talking about massive adaptations needed to be made for a different gender playing a character that's traditionally one gender, or you could even go as far to say like a different body shape, a different whatever. Do we really need massive changes and adaptations to be made nowadays? Because I think we're now at a point of progression in terms of theatre that if I saw a female Valjean, I wouldn't question it. I'd just be like, amazing. And I say female in the sense that somebody who identifies as such, any gender could play it. It was just me picking something out of my brain. I feel like I'm personally now at a point with theatre where I don't really mind or care who is playing that role, as long as how they are playing that role is I think just as good as anyone who could do it.
I agree. I do think that I think it gets a bit tricky when something is written for someone of a specific gender with a specific gender in mind. Because then they've not had any thought into can this be played by somebody else of a different gender identifying person? So it was written to be played by a boy,
I think
with no thought of, we might not get another boy who can do the drums as good as this.
I feel like, I mean, it's as simple as just flipping pronouns, in my opinion.
And I do think with theatre now as well, it is that thing of we are progressing at a very fast rate with everything in the world, just in general, but we are progressing quite quickly. So we're getting to that point where we can have characters and things played by different...
An interesting point I'd like to raise is the Miss Trunchbull in West End and Broadway, and it's always been played by a man as a woman. It's not a drag performance. It is. And
something
now with,
closer to
now with the film,
pantomime.
is it Emma Thompson is playing? That just seems really...
No, I think, again, for all we know, granted, Emma Thompson is a fantastic performer, but like, we don't know who walked into that audition room. To me, if you get somebody who walks into that audition room
and does it better than...
If they nail that part, they nail that part.
I won't lie to you, though. I was expecting a male to play the part.
Yeah.
Like, when the cast went out, I was expecting it to be a male playing Trunchbull.
It's interesting, because I never had those notions, purely because my point of reference for Matilda is that of the original movie, which Trunchbull is not played by somebody
But this
who
is
identifies
Matilda
as
the
male.
musical.
No, understandably, but like,
I
when
think-
you
I
see
think because
Matilda
it's-
is coming to film, it doesn't surprise me that they would go back to that.
To the original, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I was just expecting it to be a male because it's probably a part that I secretly want to play. So it was like, I was expecting it to have like, even like the original male actor play.
Maybe because it's so theatrical, that idea of men playing women and women
It
playing
probably
men,
wouldn't
it
translate
really
very
work
well.
on a-
Like we were talking earlier, it probably wouldn't have translated as well as it has on stage, because on stage you know it's a man dressed as a woman, but
But you're also further away from the action.
and also as
so-
well when you're in a theatre, you suspend your disbelief for those 2 hours that you're sat there. Whereas when you're seeing a film version of something, it's not as easy to do that, in my opinion.
Let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Sure.
Not Ryan.
I was going to say, can you call me by my Christian name, please? I am Elmer the Elephant to you.
Last night we saw the big show of the year, wrongly
The meat and
proclaimed,
potatoes.
wrongly proclaimed as the only musical to open during a pandemic, which is a very stupid thing of Lloyd Webber to have said, but whatever. Cinderella at the Gillian Lynn Theatre, now formerly the New London, where you worked, and so this has all come. We have, been building up to this point. It was fun, wasn't it? I mean, we talked about it before on the podcast when Andrew went to see it. We've now all seen it, so we all have thoughts, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I went into this show based on what I'd heard and the source material that I'd seen online, and they sort of set my expectations to go, this might not be a show that is for me, but that's irrelevant because it will be for somebody. But I sort of went in and expected, I'm excited to see it because it's a new show, but I don't know if this is going to be for me. By the end of Act 1, I'd already made plans to come back and see it. I don't know where to start talking about it because my brain wants to then dissect from the start to the end. Massive spoiler warning.
I don't really have time for that.
I know, but like a huge spoiler warning in regards to the show. But I don't. What should we start with? It's a huge thing to dissect in terms of what we want to talk about.
So I think the best thing to start with is what we were talking about earlier. So Ryan and I had a little conversation whilst Nick was in the loo.
Yeah.
We were talking about what had been put out online before the show had opened.
Yes.
And it was interesting to understand that the cast recording for Cinderella and all of the recordings that you've seen on YouTube and on Facebook and Instagram and all that, they were done nearly a year ago, before the book was finished, before the cast had been complete, before they'd even got into rehearsals fully, properly, and created and fully formed these characters. So likewise with what you were saying earlier about you had set expectations, that was very much the same for me. I had seen that material online and I'd seen Bad Cinderella, and it sort of set those expectations quite low. But then seeing it on stage was so different, mainly because there was a lot of acting through song, and you could see the story.
But also, I don't think they were revealing the best characters in those moments, were they?
Absolutely.
I don't know whether it wasn't that they weren't revealing the best moments, but the songs that they went out with naturally were the ones that had the things you're going to leave the theatre humming, because that's what Lloyd Webber is very good for.
Songs, weren't they?
It's what Lloyd Webber is very good for. You were always. I've not seen a single Lloyd Webber show where I've not left the theatre humming something.
He repeats the same thing over and over again.
I have.
Catchy,
Stephen Ward.
And it, I think, from a marketing perspective, it made sense what they went out with, because it gets stuck in your head. You're seeing Carrie do the songs. You're seeing certain aspects that sort of reveal what you're going to see without revealing too much. But what was very clever is what they didn't reveal was actually what made the show for me, because all of the material that I had heard, having seen it in context, I really liked it. But it's definitely a show that it's not like a show where you go in and enjoy one element of it. To me, it was enjoyable as a whole collective, because every single person on that stage was given performances for days. Every single cast member, it was incredibly strong.
Right from the opening number, it was strong.
Yeah.
Just going from the opening number, I do find it very strange that Bad Cinderella is the I Want song, because it isn't so much an I want, it's more of an I am. She's listing off all of the things that people are saying about her, so to have that song as like the third number in the show, I found it quite strange, because I was expecting it to be more like, I don't want to be this.
Do you think that's done on purpose because it starts with an almost Disney-esque opening?
Yes,
with
Oliver, very Oliver.
Yes, very Oliver.
Then, so it have the kind of, this is the village, and this is this, and this is that, and then it kind of breaks away from what you think the show is going to.
Which is very clever, in my opinion.
I wasn't too keen on the transition of, you've gone from that really pretty sound into Bad Cinderella.
Yeah.
It felt very strange in itself, the transition of that, the segue into it. But I do think with this show there's such a varying style of music. You've got tango, you've got pop.
Yeah, but that's nothing new for shows nowadays. I think the music, to my mind, is trash. But I'm not a fan of Lloyd Webber, and it is just Lloyd Webber being the most Lloyd Webber that we've heard in a very long time.
I disagree.
The music
I don't think it's trash. I think there is moments in it that, yes, you can hear that he's taken motifs from other songs that he's written. I wouldn't say it is trash. I think trash is very harsh.
It's the thing is with the music, to me, it's not. By no means was I sitting through that show going, oh, okay. At no point did it register to me that I wasn't enjoying what I was listening to.
I think the thing with Lloyd Webber is, even though the music is bad, there's always something else going on. Whether it's wonderful singing, or the orchestra sounds great, or the lighting's very pretty. You know, he knows how to put on a show.
I feel like naturally in this situation, because you said this to me on the train on the way home yesterday, you are going to be more critical on that because it is what you do also. Me as somebody, as a listener, as a consumer of the product that is the show Cinderella, I really liked it. Yeah. It wasn't I didn't particularly find it dull. But I will say it wasn't what I went away going, oh, can you remember this song and this song? I went away going, can you remember this moment in the book? That is one thing I will say about it. But that's not me saying anything negative regarding the music in regards to that. It's just,
I think that the problem is the music is the weakest bit of it.
I think, in all fairness to Nick, there were moments that I remember for bad reasons in the music, like as I said it last night, the bloody song between Cinderella and Sebastian that kept repeating itself and literally just went nowhere. That song, and same with Far Too Late, I find that song goes nowhere as well.
That's the problem with Andrew's stuff, is it starts off quite interestingly, but musically it never goes anywhere.
Yeah, there was no
there'll be a key change,
resolve in it, and that to me, they're the only two pieces of music that struck to me as I'm not a fan of that.
I find it interesting that you say that, because those moments to me are in such contrast to the other half of the type of music, which is very big, very like, I know I have a heart, stuff like that. Bad Cinderella.
That's what he does brilliantly.
But that's what I mean. I don't know whether I would challenge and say, do you really think it's not good, or do you really are they the ones that are not as epic as...
Yeah.
But you need that. You need the balance in a show, and for me, it worked.
So just talk about music. We just need to take a moment to applaud the incredible performance of Michael Hamway.
Oh my God, yes.
Because
he's sustained for about 5 to 6 business days.
If you haven't heard, I don't know if Ivano's going to be better by this point. Get well soon, Ivano. Ivano has suffered injury.
He broke his finger or something.
He's had to have an operation.
I don't know what exactly happened, but he's suffered an injury. He's had to have an operation, and he's currently out of the show.
That's the ghost of Lloyd Webber told us.
Which is very literally gutting when you're opening a brand new musical. But Michael Hamway, literally, he has, like, as Andrew said, he's worked day and night to get it to step into that role.
Because apparently he went on, I don't know where I've heard this, if I dreamt this, or he went on with a script in his hand the first night he did.
I mean, most likely, because he's not even down as cover. He's not listed as a cover for the part.
Am I making that up, Brian?
He is in the programme. It says understudies and it has his name.
Is it actually?
Yeah, it's him and another gentleman, I can't remember his name. I don't know whether he went on with a script in his hand, but I saw on Twitter, I saw some videos of his first curtain call, which were very touching. And I also saw, I think he had something like 75 minutes of rehearsal before he went on, or something ridiculous.
I will say that he has the best song in the whole show.
Yeah, and it's not about Cinderella, is it? This is his story.
For me, I'm someone who loves a good ballad, so I absolutely adored that song before we even seen the show, and Nick was like, "Oh, it's terrible." I loved it. It's Lloyd Webber doing what Lloyd Webber does best, which is giving us that moment, and it is lovely. That to me is more the I Want song than Bad Cinderella is.
So speaking of Bad Cinderella, because I wanted to say that I was trying to make my way through the show, but it's just popped into my head because you said it. That song is a hard sing anyway. Never mind the fact that the first thing, Cinderella, Carrie, in which case we saw Carrie this evening. Last night. I don't think there was a point when she could anchor and plant both feet on the floor. You're asking her to sing a hard song as it is while she's being carried, carried, or being like literally dragged across the floor or flipped around in the air of some
getting tied up to a tree.
Exactly, come on.
But Cats did that. I mean, they were...
Right, but the thing is with Cats is like...
There's millions of them.
And they're also, you're not, from my knowledge of the score in terms of Cats, if it's a high or a hard sing, a lot of them are singing together at the same time. It's not, that song is effectively being carried by Carrie. Another joke.
Carry on.
She's, I remember watching it being like, that is a very interesting way as a person to start your show. The first thing you're doing, you're not warming up to it, you're not having a moment to stand on stage and just be yourself. The statue spins round, she's there, and then bang, straight into that number, and within 5 seconds she's being carried by multiple people as she's singing the song, and you're like, how?
I mean, this is something I will say for both Lawrence Connor and Joanne M. Hunter, both of whom I adore. I think they are both phenomenal. Lawrence's direction and Joanne's choreography was insane. Even there's a moment, I'm sure Ryan will remember this moment, because it was just a moment that Ryan, I know, absolutely loved, when all the boys were half naked and
I didn't expect it. I was like, hello.
Forgive me for asking, is this the first show Lawrence has done which isn't based on a remake, like a redoing Les Mis, or a film such as School of Rock? Because this is a very...
I feel like he has done some other stuff.
But massive commercially, Lloyd Webber, this is his first kind of original...
Let me just... I could come back to you with that. I'm going to see.
So, a couple of other standouts that I need to talk about. I say a couple of other standouts. Every single character was so fleshed out and so unique in their own right. Even the two stepsisters, which could have been the same character, were not. They were... the stepsisters...
They need their own show.
The stepsisters do. The stepsisters was the first moment that I audibly shrieked with laughter, because such excellent performances. And then you have the stepmother who sounds like Joanna Lumley and absolutely fabulous. And I lived.
And we were talking before we started this that's an excellent, and we tend not to like the word on the podcast, but the stepmother and possibly the two stepsisters, it's a great excuse for some stunt casting.
It's this is the thing,
like Leslie Joseph, for example,
Yes.
or Megan Mullally, or someone like that. I think Jennifer has an
Saunders.
answer.
Yeah, so I have your answer.
Yeah.
This is the first commercial,
Yeah, I
brand
thought-
new musical. Aside from Andrew Webber concerts, this is the very first big brand new production that Lawrence has done.
End of Act
Bravo to
1.
him.
End of Act 1 with the godmother's shot.
Beauty underneath, we'll call it.
Oh no,
Which-
but
I mean, it was very much Beauty
As soon as
Underneath.
she started singing, I was like, yes, yeah. I loved the neon that came into it. I loved the fact that it was so different to everything that we'd seen up until that point. And I'm a sucker for like neon anyway. I think it just works.
I thought the dummies would come to life, like Phantom. You know, it had
did.
They did.
Did you not? Was you not watching?
They did.
They were actors that were
moving, yeah.
literally.
Okay.
Fair play to those actors, especially there was one that had to be like with his
Yeah.
arm up.
Yeah.
Fair play, that was a very hard tableau to keep. So
Yeah.
well
I
done.
didn't realise they were actors, so all testament
Yes.
to them. But the whole thing was very Love Never Dies.
I mean, so just to sort of like swing it around, mad props to Emerald Fennell. Her book was incredible. It is a very, very British musical. I know I said it last night. My favourite line in the whole show was "Shut up, you knob, it's me." I'm like, you can't get any more British than that. I think it is absolutely hilarious. I was physically wailing. I could not stop laughing.
And also, you just don't expect that in the Lord Brother show, do you?
So before we get on to the main thing that I really want to discuss, which is the opening act 2, that to me is, if there's going to be any problems this show runs into, that because Cinderella is often very commercially appeals commercially to families and typically younger children.
Which
some of
there
the
were
nature,
quite a lot
there
last
were,
night.
There's a whole school group.
the
in.
nature of the language in the show and some of the things that are discussed aren't necessarily the most family friendly, but I would also say it doesn't go too far where like I clocked it because I was like, oh, I didn't expect that, but also
It's not effing and
yeah.
I would also argue that there is a warning that does say that there is some slight language in the show.
It's fab. So Rebecca Traherne as the Queen, fabulous. This is the third thing I've seen her do. Dogfight was the first, and then I saw her as Molly in Ghost. I thought she was excellent. And then seeing her now as the Queen, loved her as the Queen. There's not a single character that isn't fabulous in it.
I think this was very fleshed out, like you said. I think
the characters very well written.
If I'm honest, I think this whole global situation has been a very much of a godsend for this production, because I don't think it would be as polished and as tight as it is had they not. Carrie was actually saying it on one of her vlogs. This is the longest rehearsal period she has ever had for a brand
3
for a
years
show.
or something.
But right, but is that because it's a brand new musical and then and you're not going into something that pre-exists and already exists? Because typically, normally your put-ins are like 2 weeks if you're going into a show that already exists, or something like Heather's where they had 75% of the material already. They're not trying to find it in the rehearsal.
But then you
room.
also look at, so from what Carrie was saying on her vlog, she's done 2 transfers that are still being rewritten.
And she's originated the
Both
production
of
of
those
the transfer, yes.
and both of those rehearsal periods weren't as long as this. All right, yeah, fair enough.
The
This is a
material was
brand
there,
new
though.
musical,
Yeah.
but the material has been written for Cinderella. It was written 2-3 years ago, and they've been still developing it.
Right, but
as they've been getting
we
into
don't
it.
know where they were with character development.
Very
we don't
true.
know how much. Well, a prime example, there's a section on the recording that's released that doesn't exist in the show that we saw. So we don't know how much chops and change is. I'm not going to say. I wouldn't necessarily say the pandemic has been a godsend for the production in terms of rehearsal period, because I think it would have the same quality whether it was done in a pandemic or not.
What I mean is, I don't mean particularly rehearsal period. I mean
Yes.
more like for polishing the book, polishing the music, polishing the formation
You mean
of the piece.
They were blessed with more time than they probably thought they were originally going to get.
I
Sure.
don't think it would have been as polished without that year gap, because obviously this was scheduled to be opened this time last year.
I just want to know who Lloyd Webber gave a necklace to get that extra time. Nope, not picking that up from the
I
show.
got it.
Thank you. Neither of them did. That was a flat joke, everybody.
No, I got it.
My name's Ryan Nixon. I'll be here all night. Thank you.
I got it.
Did
eventually.
you mentally doze off during Act 2?
Before we get to that point in Act 2,
Let's talk about the coup d'etat after this question.
okay. I found Act 2 ballad heavy
Yeah.
compared to Act 1.
There wasn't many standout moments in Act 2, besides the big thing that we'll
Besides
talk
the
about
obvious
in a
thing.
moment. But I think after that happened,
I don't know.
The church, the wedding scene was
The wedding scene was great.
yes, and I found that fab, and obviously I've mentioned it in all my tweets, but to see someone that I went to college with and haven't seen perform since we finished college, that was just incredible to
And
see
then
his
it
growth.
was almost a jump scare.
It was
The jump scare,
both of us
yes.
physically jumped out of our seat. It was
I
you audibly
yelled.
went
Yeah.
But because for me, emotionally, there is a kind of bit of a dip because the most amazing thing happens at the opening of Act 2, and then it just kind of goes, oh.
But I think this is what happened when you've got something that is so. I'm going to use this word. Sorry, Ryan, you're going to hate me. When you've got a gimmick at the start of the second act, everything goes downhill.
It's like Springtime for Hitler and the producers. Like nothing can match.
You've put that gimmick in. You started off the act extremely high, and then after that gimmick's done, that's it. Like it flatlines for a little bit, and then it comes back up again at the wedding, and then the energy sustains throughout the rest of the show.
I feel like I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily say that was a problem with this show by any means, because there is when you look at stories that follow a similar trajectory, you look at rom-coms, which is effectively what this is. If you were to put it into like movie terms, if you put it into movie genre terms, every rom-com I've ever seen at that, as it gets into the air quotes third act of the movie, where everything starts to resolve and wrap up and you get towards the end.
Ever after.
Yeah, the first portion of that third act is always a little bit like, well, we've got to get through this to. It's a funny quote. You've got to go through Jefferson Street to get to people, as in Funny Girl. Like you've got to get through that before you get to what's going to pay off. But it would already face a challenge anyway, because of exactly what you said. Such an amazing thing happens at the start of Act 2. Not only does that amazing thing happen, but then you get one of the biggest moments vocally in the show, which is I Know I Have a Heart. Yeah, it is I Know I Have a Heart, which I thought was great. And I think you could put anything after that, but I also think you need that little bit of a dip, because if you were consistently riding on that high, it would be exhausting.
I do think
you need
that,
it.
even though I agree. I think you do need that dip to put a song after you've had I Know I Have a Heart, and then you put Far Too Late in. Far Too Late, in my opinion, it, like I mentioned already, it's very repetitive. It doesn't go anywhere, whereas I Know I Have a Heart goes somewhere. And I felt like there were too many ballad moments where it was hard to go, okay, figuring out what's going on now. I don't think Far Too Late was actually needed. I think it's a song that doesn't need to exist in that musical.
Who sung it?
Carrie.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Cinderella's song where she's going, I've messed up.
Because she had a bit where she started doing one song and she sang another song.
Yeah, it's
and
the soliloquy.
I thought that was going to be a really big moment. It just kind of ended.
Is it really funny that when she started doing that, I went, this is like the mid-course breakdown from our show.
This theatre is a very interesting theatre because it was built in the 70s and it is incredibly unique for one thing only, and it's only been used once in my memory, and that was when I saw Cats in about
1920.
Yeah.
What year did the Titanic sink?
Yes, I saw it many years before that. But it, the theatre can transform, and I can't think of any other. I know things like what's the boxing musical that was on Broadway?
Rocky.
Rocky had a boxing ring that lowered from the stage, and bits of the stage went out and stuff. So this is possible, but to see something as amazing as
a whole block of the stalls
I
moving.
mean, you worked at this theatre and you didn't even know it could do that, did you?
So I knew that there was this technology, but whenever I heard people say moving seats, I thought it was very much like a 4D theatre, where it sort of like just moves ever so slightly to the side
That
or
would be
forward
quite
and
funny.
backwards. That was all I ever thought that it was for moving seats. And then I was sat there watching, so we were sat in the circle.
4DX or whatever
And
it's
I
called.
was
Yes.
I was just stunned at how beautiful that worked and how it fit so well with like the way that they were doing it. And then it was just unique because then you had different entrances and exits for the actors to come on, and it was just so pretty.
Effectively, what we're talking about, the top of Act 2 is the ball that Cinderella goes to, where in the original story, this is where she meets the prince, they fall in love, and she runs off and loses a shoe. Doesn't quite happen the same in this musical, but that's this point in the show. The entire front section
5
of the
rows.
stalls, more than
No,
5
it's more than
rows.
it's like 15.
Okay.
I wouldn't say 50.
15 is an exaggeration.
15 is an exaggeration. It's definitely more than 5 rows. And the stage that you've been watching this entire performance basically swaps places.
Yeah,
it doesn't want to
transfers to where. So you end up being where the stage was, and the stage ends up being where you were.
What was so amazing about that is not only did they use that technology, but then they transformed the auditorium into the stage. Like the whole auditorium had lights around it, and it was just
And then as well as
beautiful.
that, like they were still able to use the revolve, and which shocked me because I was like,
You didn't think that would be
I
a
didn't
thing.
think that you could actually do that when like if you've moved to the stage. I thought,
And it's so amazing. Obviously, it happened at the beginning of Cats, where you took your seats and you couldn't see the stage, and people were thinking, "Oh, I've chosen my seats badly." Then the thing revolves. What other shows, off the top of your head, would benefit?
Theme Park Fan the Musical.
Pink Up Pan Musical is literally just a dark ride in itself.
What other shows would benefit? I think something like it would. It's hard because I wouldn't have even said a production of Cinderella would have benefited from it. I just think it's not even a case of, to me, what's so great about it, it doesn't feel like they've gone, oh, we can use this technology, we'll just use it for the sake of it. It feels like it has a purpose.
Carousel comes to mind.
Carousel,
for me.
yeah.
But it's such a weird thing to happen.
I'm just
isn't it?
wondering, did they use that when they did Showboat at that theatre?
I don't think so. I don't remember hearing.
Because I
anything about
remember,
No.
maybe not.
it might have been its second configuration.
Because I know that it might even. Did they do it with Warhorse?
No, they definitely
Because
didn't do
there
it.
were, I know that they did some. Anyway, yeah, I know. I'm pretty sure with one of those they had. It must have been Showboat. I remember that when I was working.
I mean,
as a crew
you wonder
for-
why they didn't do it with School of Rock, because it would have been perfect for the finale.
I don't.
So-
It wouldn't have worked for School of Rock. It's not that sort of show that.
When I tell you when this started to happen, the roller coaster of emotions that I experienced.
The dark ride of emotion.
The first, as it started moving, I was like, oh, like it's huge. You just don't expect the sort of, it's so dramatic. Like it's not hyped up as dramatic, but the movement of
But
it
they were
is.
just sitting there.
But that's what was so funny. It then, my humour is a strange humour. The look on people's faces as they were just sat there peacefully, and this entire theatre is turning, and they were moving at a pace that
Do you
was,
think they
to
were
me,
aware?
they were, because at unless they were peeing, but a sign was held up.
that was just saying keep your masks on.
That was.
Oh,
keep your
was
masks,
it?
There's
yeah.
no warning of the cred.
Maybe not. Maybe there must be. There must be a warning that comes when they get the tickets, or
I mean,
ushers tell them
well, it
as they
does
go
say
in.
When you
it
book your
it
ticket.
says
Yeah,
you've got a
that's-
ticket to the ball, and your
You'll
seats
be-
will move.
you'll be moved in a way you've never been moved
Right.
before.
So, and I think.
It alludes to
But
it.
no one
But
expects.
watching it then started to crack me up because I was like, look at them go, look at them spin.
Because I think you get a better experience watching it than being in it.
So I can't comment on that because the next time I go and see the show, Dylan and I have already said that
We're
we
gonna
are
get that.
going to purchase the seats that I can then add on as a +1 onto my roller coaster cred cap. I'm going to put my arms up and have a great time.
What I'm quite
Big, bright,
intrigued with.
beautiful tomorrow.
Yes.
What I'm quite intrigued with is, having worked at that theatre, I know exactly how all the backstage is configured. So I'm really intrigued to see. I would love to know when that swaps position, how all the wings are gonna, like, what happens with the wing space.
But they have just renovated the theatre, so unless they've renovated the backstage to accommodate,
Did they renovate it knowing that they needed to use that? That's the question.
maybe.
I feel like Andrew has wanted to use it for a very, 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 very long time. But this is the first show he's had that works with it.
Aside from Cats, which
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely think that
I know it's a
it
gimmick.
made it
and
so pretty.
It's a gimmick and
So
it's stupid,
good.
but it's done because they're waltzing.
It was
the
so
whole thing with
good.
the audience revolve, and there are lots of revolving lights as well. So it
And
was.
do you know what it reminded me of? It very much reminded me
loved
of Dick Whittington at the National. I don't know if you saw it when it was streamed last
No.
year, because that was done in the round, and it very much had that sort of similar feel where it felt very much like.
I'm obsessed.
I thought it was phenomenal.
There's footage. The National did a very famous production of Wind in the Willows, which was Trevor Nunn and Alan Bennett wrote it, and the revolve in that just did things like had sort of 28 buildings rising up from it in the early 90s, I think. And
Yeah.
it's very clever what revolves can do, but to turn it on its head. And I was reading about it online this morning. It said the walls can move in this theatre as well.
Well, so the theatre was built to be
A conference centre, wasn't it?
it was built to be configured in various different ways. From my understanding, it can be configured in black box, proscenium, which is essentially the same,
Yeah.
thrust, but I don't think it's ever been used for that, and it can be done in the round. I know for Showboat they did it in the round.
Yeah.
They reconfigured it for that, which is why for some reason I thought about they used that moving seat mechanism, but it was built specifically to change formation, which is why when you go to that
But you never
theatre,
think of it happening.
you've got it on the sides.
You never think of it happening mid-performance, do you?
But it works so well because, I mean, look at the narrative of the fact that it's said in your ticket you're going to the ball.
Yeah.
You are a part of it.
The only thing I was a bit upset with about that is obviously where we were sitting, we didn't get that nice reveal of Cinderella walking into the ball.
Yeah.
Because our seats were moved.
Her moment was
It also
very
did.
lost.
You make a good point. It also did affect the sight lines.
I did.
Yeah.
So
It
interestingly,
genuinely affected it.
Not to be like, So we'll come on to this because we had a bit of a pain with ticketing on it, but sure. We were sat in restricted view seats. We were moved from seats that weren't restricted view to restricted view. And then also, I saw that somebody tweeted 2 hours before the show that last minute they picked up tickets that were basically where we were supposed to be sat, and we were moved from those seats.
But the
which
nice thing
annoyed
about
me.
this theatre is there are no restricted.
I mean,
Yeah.
yes,
Until
I
the
mean,
stage moves.
The seats were still good. I can't complain.
They are-
and
they're
Lloyd Webber
slightly-
theatres were so good in regards
They are
to the
slightly
situation.
restricted in that theatre. If you sit, especially if you sit on the sides, you do get a slight restricted view. However, it isn't a theatre like big houses like the Sondheim where you have to lean forward to be able to see anything.
Anything.
You're not in the upper circle balcony.
Well,
whatever they're called.
I was sat when I saw Les Mis in 2014 again with Carrie playing Eponine, phenomenal. I had to lean forward the whole time. I was I was literally in the gods. It was horrendous. Worst.
Look down.
Yeah, it was the worst experience, worst show experience I've been to. But I loved the show and I loved Carrie. But you do get a very good view. I think the only problem with this particular show is because they're using that movable seat mechanism. It does affect your sightlines if you were sat on
Where we were sat.
If you're specifically where we were sat, because we were sat on the left side.
Yes.
So that really did affect the sightlines when
But
they were
like,
walking around. But I think it would affect it on the same with the other side.
Yeah,
'cause
exactly.
The way that they stretched it, obviously,
Yeah.
Lawrence utilised the full space of that
It is what
stage.
it is. It's one of those things that ultimately somebody was going to get shafted with those seats, and say shafted, it sounds really bad, but I don't mean it like that. Ultimately, someone in the theatre was going to have to, for that moment, not have the best
a good
view for
view.
it to work. And would I rather us not have got the reveal of Carrie coming into the ball, but them still use the revolving seats? Absolutely.
Do you wish you didn't know about that moment?
The revolving seats, yes, I hate the fact that it was spoiled for me on Twitter before. I am so upset that it was
But
spoiled for me
it's
on
like
Twitter.
I knew that was a thing
It still amazed me. But
before they when the tickets went out on sale. I knew that was a thing. Predominantly, I think Nick spilled it for me. I think Nick
Well,
was the one who
I
said
told you it was possible.
because then I was like, oh, that's so clever, that's really
Yeah.
cool. And then we realised it was a thing. I think the only problem, the thing that made me a bit upset about that moment and about the end of Act 1 as well, was Cinderella's dress wasn't as glamorous as I was hoping
I
it
don't
would
think it's
be.
meant to be. I don't think it's like when the Beast turns into a human at the end of Beauty and the Beast, and he's ugly.
I don't know.
I don't think we're meant to fall in love with Cinderella. At
No,
that point.
I think this is where my interpretation of
'Cause
it,
she's
what my
nicer as a
interpretation of
goth
it
in my
was
mind
was
anyway.
that she didn't feel loved and she didn't feel beautiful, so she wanted to become everything that she wasn't and everything that people wanted her to be. So why would you not take it all that way to the far extreme of making like the Cinderella ball gown from the Cinderella movie? Like, obviously you can't do it because it's Disney, but do you know what I mean? Like something similar to that, or like the Glinda ball gown.
I think if you look at, but like...
We were also far away, it might have been really twinkly up front.
Context for it, in that moment, we are very accustomed to these people of Belleville, and the entirety of Belleville, other than Cinderella, are extremely beautiful people. I didn't think Cinderella's ball gown was anything different to what all of the other people were wearing, and I think that was the intention.
I just think because everything else was so extravagant, like all of the other gowns, it might. Well, I don't know. Like
it was
I
the same
felt
caliber, in my opinion.
I felt maybe it's because I'm just looking too much at the Queen.
The Queen's costumes were
she
the
had
best.
ridiculous costumes. I think that's probably why, because I'm seeing too much of like the Queen's.
Hang on, I need to retract what I just said. The Queen's costumes weren't the best, but all of the costumes were fantastic. But the Queen's costumes were my favourite. I need to just get that out there because I don't want to phrase that incorrectly. But I think the idea of it is I thought the gown was beautiful. I thought the shoes were amazing.
Oh, I don't know. I thought the gown was beautiful.
But the purpose of it wasn't necessarily for Cinderella to stand out in that moment, but actually, ironically, it's the one moment in that show where she fits in. So if they made her ball gown even more extravagant than everybody else, then it's counterproductive to the idea that everyone in Belleville is this heightened beauty. She's coming up to that standard of beauty. It's silly because the whole point of the show is everyone is
I'm sure we're gonna have to start wrapping up soon, but I just want to bring up one other
I wanted to ask you one more question,
Dylan.
As a director, and I was chatting to Ryan before do you think the whole of Act 2 should have stayed with the new seating configuration? Because I thought the wedding scene would have been nice.
I don't think so. I think it worked it worked very well the way it did. I think if you'd extended it any longer than that, you would have a lot of issues. I think it worked well. Also, if you got to think that you wouldn't be able to do some of the stuff that you were able to do if you were having the wedding scene.
We were invited to the ball, not the wedding.
Yeah, and also you wouldn't be able to do specific things like if...
Because scenery lowered down, didn't it?
Exactly, so you wouldn't be able to use the flies, you wouldn't be able to get all that nice pretty lighting that they had and all of that, so you would lose a lot of really fantastic moments if the seating configuration did stay like that.
And there's one lighting moment which is really nice when they were doing the Latin number.
And the blue.
And they had kind of LED bursts, which is quite nice.
So, sort of in terms of that, exactly what moment for the remainder of Act 2 would you have the seats moved back? Because, again, logically, it makes more sense to have it revolve back round when it did.
I'd have it in the bows, if we were to...
Interesting choice for... Oh, that is definitely another thing I need to bring up about it. And the more I think about it, I really like it. The ending of this show is so understated, it reminded me of My Fair Lady. It's a scene,
and there was no curtain call music.
No, but that's
that often happens in previews.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they'll kind of leave that to the very last.
Because I've seen the Lloyd Webber shows I've seen, I've not heard bow music in.
Besides a lot of the older stuff.
But Phantom doesn't, Evita doesn't.
Joseph
School of Rock had a big...
School of Rock did.
That's more contemporary though, isn't it?
Yeah. So
that's what I mean, like...
The other big thing I want to bring up before we wrap up is the phenomenal moment. I'm going to give a bit of a spoiler warning here. The phenomenal moment where we meet Prince Charming in the second act. We've all grown up believing that Prince Charming is one thing, and in this production, he is the complete opposite. And I think it is absolutely phenomenal that they have made such an iconic character, spoiler warning, gay. I absolutely loved that. I thought it was so brilliant, and the way that it was brought out, because if you actually... it was foretold in Act 1. I was thinking about this. There was this foretelling in Act 1 where they were singing, "He's a man's man. He's a man's man, man." That was foreshadowing.
I didn't get that lyric.
No, but all of the lyrics is like. Also, in that song, they mention how they would trust him with their sisters and they wouldn't lay a finger on their sisters.
It was foreshadowing what was coming,
clever.
and I thought that was just brilliant. And just so you understand what man's man is like someone who's like a man but is very pally with other men, and you can trust
mates and things.
Yeah, so that would be a man's man. But then in this context, man's man was alluding to him.
I don't think the title needs the third man. Because that's what when I was hearing the song,
he's a man's man.
I know, but I don't think it needs...
Man,
it was very confusing, the lyric.
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense. I feel, in terms of the production, it is I can confidently say this, and from my personal experiences, this is a take on the traditional story of Cinderella that I have never seen before.
Yep.
It is very fresh and very original in
Very
what it does.
contemporary, very British.
In my opinion, and I think it has. Nick asked me a really interesting question the other night. Do you think it will be a hit? And I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens once theatres can completely sell out again, and I'm really interested to see what they keep doing in regards to like the marketing and if Carrie should leave or if Rebecca Traherne should leave or anyone else should leave, will they stunt cast it? Because I think it's a great show for stunt casting if they're going to do
Just talk about marketing, I absolutely dislike the logo. I have hated the logo since the very first day it was.
But once
you
see the show, it makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. The only reason, I think, yes, it does make sense that she's the spray can and all of that.
And also the E and the R form slippers, which is clever.
Which is what I said to you, because you were like, what is that? I just don't like the blue.
Okay.
I think the blue. I do. I think it works.
We've had enough of Dylan talk about blue backgrounds and logos for
Yes. Oh my god.
I think the blue works really well in the sense that her gown becomes blue and all of that sort of stuff. But I don't know. I think I wanted it a bit more.
Well, you like the colours in the show, didn't you?
I
It
yeah,
doesn't
I
really
want
match.
I think it does. It's because the blue is the blue to me stands out as the blue that's in the end of Act 1, but also the purple. There's the purple themes throughout the show, which is the sort of the dress that she's spray painted. The use of those. It's a very cool tone the show is, and I love that. I love a cool tone show. I love the set design.
Oh, the set design was phenomenal.
The lighting was great as well. Like as a package, this show is fantastic in my
Gentlemen,
opinion.
thank you so much. We need to go and see another show, which we'll talk about in a future
All
episode.
in all, I think we all really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes.
I'm very excited to see it again.
Yes.
So am I.
Thank you very much. This has been Musical Talk. Ryan, Dylan, we'll have you on again soon, but we'll have to see another show now, so bye.
Bye.
For more information about Musical Talk, please visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk. You can email us at feedback@musicaltalk.co.uk, listen to past episodes on iTunes and YouTube, and follow our social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.